Hi, this is Paul Sandhu, continuing with my series on Genesis, the Book of Origins, and going through step by step the real history of the cosmos, the history that we have been taught. History is a very important subject because without understanding our history, our past, from where we have come, it is impossible to understand the present or to plan for the future. So that is one of the problems in our world, is that they live in the matrix and everything that people have been taught is basically a lie. Okay, so I've been talking in my past videos on this series, and there's getting to be quite a collection here, but it doesn't matter because Genesis is such an important book and it has so much information that I could talk about it for the next 1,000 years and probably not cover it all. Anyhow, because it covers the history, see, the Bible is the only book in the entire world that contains the entire history of creation, from before time begins right into the infinite future. And particularly, it contains the history of man. So whether one believes it or not is a different subject, but it does. It does have a complete history of our origins, our purpose, and our destiny, if one chooses to study and to believe it. And if they don't, that's fine too, because if you don't believe in the Bible, then you do believe in some fantasies, and that's what they are, like evolution, that you just sprung up from some pigs or monkeys or something like that, So stupid, it's insanity. But yet we live in an insane world, so it is no doubt that people would, believe such things. Okay. So anyhow, in the past series on this, in the past videos in this series, I have documented that the Bible teaches, as well as the mythologies, myths, legends of all cultures, particularly the major ones like the Greeks, Romans, and the European mythologies, and also the Eastern mythologies like Hindu mythology, which is very, sophisticated and developed, that it makes account of worlds, plural, that have existed right here on the earth. Okay, the earth and the world are two different things. The earth is a landmass, including some water, but mostly water actually, with some landmass, on which people, whether they are humans or something else, they build cities, places of habitation, structures, roads, etc. That is called the world. Okay, so in the Bible it is mentioned that worlds have existed and worlds have been destroyed, as well as in the histories of all mythologies that have a record of some very fantastic civilizations with very advanced technologies and some warfare, like that would be something that you would read, that you would watch maybe in a Star Wars movie, like the Death Star weaponry and such things. There's a record of all those things, okay? Of flying machines, of like atomic type, nuclear type warfare, utter destruction. And again, the Bible talks about that as well. Okay, so because we have been so conditioned to believe lies rather than the truth, that people find this information to be very amazing, and it is amazing information. Okay, for example, when we talk about Lucifer, and everybody generally assumes that he was an angel. And the only reason they do that is people have been asking me, okay, you say that Lucifer was a man. How do you come to that conclusion? And my question is, how did you come to the conclusion that Lucifer was an angel? It's not in the Bible. So how did you come to that conclusion? Somebody fed you that information, right? Right. So if that information was incorrect, then so much of the past history that even Bible scholars have pieced together falls apart. Okay? In Isaiah chapter 14, there is no mention of any angel whatsoever, as opposed to Ezekiel chapter 28, where it clearly identifies that evil creature as an angelic cherubim or a spirit being. Okay, So these are the kind of things, like, a lot of information that people have, they have arrived at it because it has been fed to them, and they have not really read for themselves, studied for themselves as to what the Bible actually teaches. And even when you compare it to mythologies are replete with information about human-like beings, whether you call them mankind or man-like beings. Some of them being giants, very big, but yet they were very man-like in that they had like 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head, 2 eyes, etc. Not always 2 eyes. They had the Cyclops, which had 1 eye, which I'll be talking about. But they were like basically humanoids, you could say. Okay? And there is evidence, and this is what I'll be presenting in this video today, is the evidence of construction, particularly Cyclopean construction, architecture, that is littered throughout the world, from Russia down to the tip of South America, it's in the waters, it's inside the earth, it's everywhere. And these are the questions that most so-called Bibles, Christian people, they never think about these things. Are we to believe that all this happened in the time frame of the 7 generations or 8 generations from Adam to Noah? That all this was done in that time period? Because in this past history, the past 5,000 years, we have pretty good documentation that we know that all these things didn't happen in this time frame. Okay? But how did all this happen, and when did it happen? The amount of construction, ruins that are to be found on this earth that could not possibly have been made by the present race of man, it is so great that one has to stop and think, when did these things happen? And who built them? Okay? If they are real, then there must be a record of them in the Bible, and I will show you that there is. So, I will begin now by talking about some of these civilizations that predate the present one, that began with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. These worlds that predate that time, by a long, long time I might add, and the type of creatures that inhabited those worlds, and the type of structures that they have left behind as evidence that they were here, right here on this earth. They're no longer here. Or at least if they are, some of them are still around. They're very well hidden. And that is another story, that there is so much that is hidden on this earth that there is no possible way inside the earth, inside the waters, inside the seas, inside caves, dens, jungles, forests, that we don't even have a clue as to what exists right here on this earth, never mind up in the heavens. Alright, so let's begin with some video clips about some of these ancient worlds that have come and gone. Okay, as you watch these videos, I'm going to include a couple of clips of these worlds, you could say, at least these cities that are littered all around the world under the seas with massive construction and above ground as well, especially in very high mountainous regions like in South America, in Peru, Bolivia, etc., and also in Russia, China, India, everywhere. Okay, then what we are told, okay, and these are all ruins. So obviously these cities were built by somebody lived in them, and one of the things which is the gigantic proportions of the size of the masonry, the stones that are used in these buildings. It would definitely suggest that the people who built them were rather gigantic in size. And of course, Bible talks about giants being in the earth in the past, and also in mythology everywhere there's stories of giants. One comment I want to make about giants is this: that we lump giants all into one category. But just like there are races of humans, you can have people that are like pygmies, which basically they are like 3 feet tall, to like giant races like the Nordics, etc., that can grow to be 7 or 8 feet tall, or at least like well over 6 feet, so the size is double. Same thing in the case of giants. Their sizes were not all the same. There were different races of giants. Some, as the Bible tells us, we can read in Amos, for example, God says that their height was like the height of cedars. Their strength was like that of oak trees. And I will include a link to that scripture here. Okay? So, on the other hand, there were giants like Goliath, again, whose size is given to us, and that of Og, king of Bashan, that was killed by Moses and the Israelites. Their dimensions are not quite the height of cedars. Like Goliath, for example, the story of David and Goliath is well known by people. He was maybe around 9 or 10 feet tall. Certainly not the height of a cedar. Okay, and Og, the king of Bashan, might have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 or 15 feet tall, which of course is very gigantic by what we would consider to be an average height these days, but still not the height of cedars. And the proportions of these giants, which are found in the latter part of history, latter part meaning in the last 5,000 years or so, they are much smaller in dimension than, say, would have been the Cyclops or the Titans, about which I have talked in the past, but will, make mention again in this video. And I will include a video which will show you the dimensions of what the Bible means when it talks about the Amorite with the heights of a cedar tree. Okay, you will see. So this problem, one of the stories, one of the issues, this is a little bit of a digression, with this Nephilim story, which makes it circles all over, is that Nephilim is a word for giant. That's what it is. It's a person of giant proportions. But all the giants in the Bible, they're not Nephilim. Some of them are called Emims. Some of them are called Zamzumims. So there are different races of giants that are mentioned in the Bible, and they were not all the same size. The Nephilim may well have been the biggest of the giants, but they were certainly not angelic beings, and they certainly were not hybrid beings. Getting back to these videos that you're looking at with the worlds, okay, or these places that existed in the past. Now, as you're watching these underwater cities, etc., the common biblical scholar will say that these are ruins from the times of Noah. Okay. Now, there's one problem with that interpretation, and I'll tell you what it is. The problem is that these ruins are scattered all over the world. Okay. And one of the things they have in it is some writings. Like, for example, the Egyptian pyramids, etc., they have hieroglyphics, they're called. And then they have the Assyrian ones, which have some different type of script. In the Indian subcontinent, it's a different type of script. Chinese, a different type of script. And in South America, it's different again. Okay. Now, in the time of Noah, one of the things that the people had in common was their language and culture. They were the same people. And the same people would use the same language, the same script, and they would also use the same type of construction techniques. So all these constructions, although there is all these ruins, there are a lot of similarities in them, but yet some of them are different enough to indicate that they were not from the same culture. Okay, so these ruins could not just be from the time of Noah, because one of the dead giveaways is the language. Because the language should have been, the script, etc., should have been the same all over, and it is not. So this tells you, like I told you in videos past, that there were ages of time that went by in which different worlds existed on this earth that were destroyed, and they were replaced. Now, this is also happens in our observation. Let's say, for example, like in any city, there's always redevelopment. There's always destruction, you could say, going on, even without the benefit of war. And because buildings don't just last forever, so they have to be replaced. So this way that these worlds, they are a composite of many different time periods in which these buildings were built. And if you look at some of these buildings, which I will show you, it is clearly obvious that some of that masonry or the stonework is very, very old, upon which somebody built. It's like if you go to London or one of these old cities in Rome, etc., some of the buildings may have been from the 18th, 19th century, but they are not existing in the format that they were originally built. They have been repaired, they have been added to, some of the stones have been replaced, everything, basically in most cases they've been gutted, and though the footprint could be the same, the structure on top is entirely different. Okay, so these structures, they are not built at the same time. So to lump them all into one category, that they were all built in the time of Noah in a period of some 1600 years, in basically the lifespan of like only 8 generations, doesn't make sense. Okay, so there had to be times that when these things were built, and they came before Adam. As I told you, there were 3 ages at least that preceded the present one. They were overseen by at least 3 different creatures in terms of evil. There was one, the first was the angelic race, then was the human race led by Lucifer, and finally is the beastly race, which is led by Satan. All these things, when people, whether they're good or evil, they build places to live. That's normal. They grow crops. They have to eat. They have to have a roof over their heads. So evil people do as much building as good people would. So just because these times were evil and the inhabitants were evil doesn't mean that, they wouldn't have built anything. Of course they would. So these ruins that you're looking at are all over the earth, and they are evidence that our world is not the only world that has existed on this earth. This is evidence that there have gone by ages of time in which different races of humans and other creatures have lived here. They have built things. They have fought wars. They have destroyed these worlds. It has happened. And of course, people who do not believe in the Bible or in God, they always try to, come up with explanations of aliens came from planet X, Y, and Z, and they did that and everything else. No. No, 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 no. This earth was designed, built, created by God. It was given to races of men. And yes, in time, these men became, they were transformed into something entirely different in many cases, because there was a lot of genetic manipulation went on, as I told you in my last video, and therefore we ended up with hybrid beings. We ended up with entirely new species of creatures that came to inhabit and live here. And it is the evidence of these things. It is carved in stone, and it is all over the earth. Okay, I have included a lot of video clips in this program, and there's a reason for that. Most people are not aware of all these anomalous structures that are found all over the world. Okay? And keep in mind that these are ruins. Keep in mind also, as I mentioned in my last video, that the more advanced technology, or the more advanced, maybe I didn't mention this, but the more advanced a civilization becomes, the more easily destructive their construction technologies become. For example, like if we look at 9/11, those 110-story towers, they were basically turned to dust, and by allegedly just a few hundred or a couple of thousand gallons of kerosene fuel. Okay, so our present-day construction techniques are not designed to withstand any amount of force that, any amount of recent, the force of hurricanes or the force of major storms, tornadoes, etc. These buildings get destroyed, earthquakes, they get destroyed very, very easily. Okay, so advanced civilization like ours, if it were subjected to let's say what happened on 9/11, something in the scale 100 times, 1,000 times that. It would probably destroy like all of New York City, and the evidence of its ever having existed would completely disappear. So the point here is that if I am correct about these ages of time, that the further back in time we go, the more advanced the civilizations become, and there has been a deterioration since the beginning. The first administrators of God's creation, the angelic race, they were the most technologically advanced of all. As we are told about the anointed cherub in Ezekiel 28, he is called full of wisdom. Okay? And therefore, their knowledge and understanding was greater than what we have at the present time. So their construction techniques of the people that inhabited the first earth would have been far more advanced. And therefore, of those ages that go right back into the mists of time, there probably is not hardly any evidence that has been left. Okay. So these major constructions, which actually came in the later ages, built out of stone, and there must have been a reason why they built out of stone, because they probably were aware of how easily destroyed the buildings such as ours are, and therefore they wanted something perhaps a little more sturdier. I'm not sure, I'm just speculating here. But what we need to observe here is the enormous size of these buildings. Okay, so that again suggests something here, that in the process of time, the creatures that came to inhabit the earth, they were not typical average size human beings. There was something anomalous about them. One of the anomalies was their sheer size. And I will also play a little, clip from a Hollywood movie to give you an idea of the scale. Because it is only people of those kind of proportions that would even think of employing size of blocks of stone, etc., the size like you're seeing on the screen, in their construction. Even like a giant race, say for example like Goliath, they may be 9-10 feet tall. I do not believe they would be able to accomplish feats like what there's happened here, and never mind people like, average sized people like today. Like these stones, it is not even possible to move them even today with all the machinery that we have, especially in these remote places like up in the Ural Mountains in Russia, and up in the Andes Mountains in South America, or the Himalayas in India. It is not possible for these machines to even reach up there. Okay, so the techniques, the technology that was employed, and the very people that built them, they were not what we would consider to be normal human beings, yet they were flesh and blood. Yet they were physical beings, because these are physical structures built to be inhabited by creatures that are flesh and not spirit. And I just want to add here, that just looking at these videos or pictures, it is not really possible to get an idea of the scale and size of these boulders, these rocks that are used. It's literally like almost mountainous, like sometimes when you drive through the Rocky Mountains or something, you look at the side of a mountain wall and there'll be like this one big piece of rock which is just gigantic. It is like literally mountainous how big these stones are that were used in this construction. So the story that is told by these stones is of the worlds on this earth being much, much older than our present one, which is, civilization now dates back some less than 5,000 years. That is after the flood. But including the time before the flood, is no more than 6,000 years old. And this is evidence, like I said, from the top to the bottom, that earth was inhabited far longer and by a far greater number of people. And again, a qualified people as not just being mankind, but different types of humanoid creatures, let's say these giants or these cyclops, etc., or the titans, that they were here And they built these places, and this is the evidence which has been left behind for us. And this is again, like, proving God has left this for us to study and to come to the realization that it is the Bible that is correct. When it talks about ages of time, when it talks about that God created the worlds, not just a single world. And again, as I explained in some of my previous videos, it had to be like that because God was going to allow evil to come into existence in his creation, and evil had to be given time to be born, to grow, to mature, and to reach full age. And that did not happen overnight, my friends. Okay, now as you watch this battle scene from the movie Wrath of the Titans, which involves this battle with the Cyclops, I want to bring an interesting fact to your attention, which is the term Cyclopean masonry or Cyclopean architecture. What you've been looking at with these massive stones in these different clips I've been playing, one fact that stands out is that these stones are not cut in straight lines. They're different shapes, yet they fit together perfectly. So how they were made to fit together, what techniques were used, nobody really knows. But these are all over, that these stones are all over the world, and they are constructed using Cyclopean architectural techniques. Now, the interesting fact that I want to draw your attention to is when they use the term Cyclopean, is that because this was actually built by the Cyclops, who are supposed to have been some of the earliest inhabitants of the earth along with the Titans? Do you see, people just think that this is all like mythology and fiction, and the Bible is absolutely nonfiction. And in mythology, although it's fictionalized, there is a lot of fact in it as well. So keep that term in mind, Cyclopean masonry. Okay, H.P. Lovecraft, who was one of the preeminent horror fiction writers of the 20th century, he wrote a lot about this Cyclopean architecture. And here's his website. It's called The Lovecraftsman. And in it gives you 5 real-world examples of H.P. Lovecraft's Cyclopean architecture. And you can see here, these pictures here, and especially this one here, right? This is from, I don't know, I think in Greece somewhere. But you can see that these are odd-shaped stones. They're not like all cut in straight lines, yet they fit perfectly together. And this is one of the most massive structures in the world. This is called Sacsayhuaman. It is in Peru, in South America. And if you look at this picture here, you see that this gives you the scale of how big these stones are. But again, you can see they're not cut in straight lines, but they do fit together perfectly. This is an example of Cyclopean architecture, and I would contend that these things were actually built by the giant Cyclops in a very, very distant past, in ages long, long gone. when it comes to mythology or information in the Bible, such as about the giants or about other creatures, such as it mentions satyrs, unicorns, dragons, leviathan, behemoth, okay, talks about the heavens being destroyed, we can either think that it is all fiction or it is factual, as the evidence of all these structures which I have shown you proves that there was a time when there were some very, very big people on this earth that built all these things. So, and when you combine that with the terminology, for example, the use of the word Cyclopean, then it is a logical conclusion that these creatures were indeed real. But they did not exist like in the recent past. Their history goes a lot further back than that. Now here's one last clip about megalithic structures around the world, and then I'm going to move on as to the state of the earth as we first find it in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, when it says that it was without form and void, which means that it was in a state of barren wilderness, broken down, destroyed, or in a state of decay, which is not how God created it in the beginning.
We're here with our local guides, Dr. Teo Paredes, anthropologist, and Wilco, who is a local indigenous wisdom keeper, the site of Sacsayhuaman, or Sacsayhuma. And this is the largest polygonal wall in the Americas. The quarry is 8 kilometers, or 5 miles away. The question is, how were these stones moved from the quarry, which is up and over a series of mountains? Conventional archaeology says that because there was a high population in Cusco, people would be able to simply roll the stones on top of wooden rollers, that sort of distance, and pulling with ropes, etc., etc. But they can't explain how something of this size was cut from the bedrock wall, A, and B, the fact is that in Inca times, the only trees that grew in this area are small scrub trees that do not have straight, not stems, but trunks. And so the alternative explanation is that this was built thousands of years before the Inca and was done by a race that understood and utilized forms of resonance and vibration. In other words, lost ancient, high technology.
I think by now it's clear that all that exists on this earth cannot have been built by the current inhabitant of the earth, which is modern man. So that again is the evidence I wanted to provide in this program, that the worlds have existed here. They were inhabited by humans, human-like creatures, humanoids, by giants, by other mythical creatures. That all creatures of mythology, they are real. Okay, they seem very fantastic to us, and we call it fantasy, but there's not fantasy, it is reality. And therefore, we have to remove the blinders, we have to remove the programming of disinformation that we are fed with since the day we are born, and we have to start looking at this world through fresh eyes. Okay, and of course, if all this information is found in the Bible, then as a Christian, why would you think any different? Okay, that is my question. So, to repeat, that ages of time have gone by, when the gap theory, which I mentioned in my last video, is very valid, that between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, and the earth was without form and void, which means it was a darkness covered barren wilderness, and that is not how God created it, so it became like that. How did it become like that? It became like that through the wars that were fought by these ancient races that inhabited the earth, and these wars with weaponry that was quite fantastic as well, something like out of a sci-fi movie like Star Wars. So I'm going to close this program with another clip of some of these wars that are mentioned that many people have compared to nuclear war, and that are recorded in the pages of the books like the Mahabharata, which is one of the major texts of Indian mythology, and also, mind you, in the Bible, because it talks about the world being a wilderness, it talks about cities being broken down, and therefore, let's see that what it is that caused the earth to become without form and void, when it is very apparent that that is not how it was created in the beginning.
After he saw the mushroom cloud of the first atomic bomb detonation at the Trinity site in New Mexico, father of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, said, "Now I have become death, the destroyer of world." He was quoting from the Bhagavad Gita, the sixth book of the Mahabharata, a Sanskrit epic from ancient India speaking of great war that took place in remote times, which brought much death and destruction. Some verses allude to nuclear warfare, and this is exactly what made Oppenheimer and others consider the possibility of an ancient nuclear war that had took place on Earth way before the Second World War and the first nuclear bomb detonation. Both the Mahabharata and the Ramayana depict the catastrophic outcome of the war waged between the Rama Empire and the enemy considered by some to have been the Empire of Atlantis. The Mahabharata reads, "Gurkha, flying a swift and powerful Vimana, hurled a single projectile charged with the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose with all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andakas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment." Researchers have had a hard time dating these sacred Hindu texts due to the lack of organic material present at the sites where they were found. Some interpreters believe the events depicted occurred about 24,000 years ago, while others date the Empire of Rama to 7,300 before Christ. Physical evidence in the form of glass is scattered throughout various deserts of the world. Sand transforms into glass at temperatures above 1,800 degrees Celsius, and scientists agree the only way this could have happened would be due to a meteorite impact. However, there is no crater to attest that, not even after scanning from a satellite. Instead, the atomic testing grounds in New Mexico might offer a clue of the glass's origin. At the place where the atomic bomb has impaled the ground, a considerable yellowish-green glass crater had formed. But there's so much glass spread across the desert that a bomb 10,000 times more powerful than ours would have been needed to produce that amount. And this is exactly what the Ramayana, the second major ancient Indian epic, describes. It was a weapon so powerful that it could destroy the earth in an instant, a great soaring sound in smoke and flames, and on it sits death. Tutankhamun's pendant, displayed at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, also bears a piece of this destruction. In the middle section of the necklace is embedded a scarab made of yellow glass from the Egyptian desert. After dating the item, researchers realized it originated earlier than the Egyptian civilization itself, and yet again, the impact of a meteorite was credited for the piece, but there was still no evidence of where the object had hit. However, the ancient Hindu epics offer more clues for what could have formed this desert glass. The Mahabharata describes a rain of fire arrows which produced effects similar to the shockwave of a nuclear explosion. I quote, "Thence arrows of flame, like a great shower, issued forth upon creation, encompassing the enemy. A fierce wind began to blow upward, showering dust and gravel. Birds croaked madly, the very elements seemed disturbed. The earth shook, scorched by the terrible violent heat of this weapon. Elephants burst into flame and ran to and from the frenzy over a vast area. Other animals crumpled to the ground and died. From all points of the compass, the arrows of flame rained continuously and fiercely." Located on the modern-day territories of Pakistan and India, the ruins of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa had been deserted and leveled to the ground at the same time more than 4,500 years ago. Skeletal remains at the site of Mohenjo-daro were found holding their hands as if an inevitable cataclysm was heading their way. Beneath the coat of sand, archaeologists also discovered a layer of radioactive ash. So what might have caused the mysterious demise of this great civilization with highly advanced urban areas encompassing superior irrigation and drainage systems, communal baths, multi-store buildings, granaries, calculated trading practices, and board games like chess? Was it because the Indus River had changed course as researchers suspect, or rather due to a great war that had brought the entire region to its knees, both literally and metaphorically? Drone Parva, the seventh book of the Mahabharata, describes such an event. "We beheld in the sky what appeared to us to be a scarlet cloud resembling the fierce flames of a blazing fire. From that mass many blazing missiles flashed, and tremendous roars, like the noise of 1,000 drums beaten at once. And from it fell many weapons, winged with gold, and thousands of thunderbolts with loud explosions, and many hundreds of fiery wheels." We can only guess if the Vedas texts are referring to an ancient atomic war which took place over these territories. If so, there are numerous aspects which intrigue us. Were there really flying vessels similar to our own back then? Were these gods depicted in the Hindu scriptures mortal men that have reached a higher level of technological evolution, or rather a group of extraterrestrial beings that have descended upon the earth in archaic times? Whatever the case, we can let our imagination wander.
I just want to conclude by saying that these texts from mythology, whether it's Greek mythology or Hindu mythology, or stories of myths and legends, they're not to be taken as gospel truth. However, there is some truth in them. So these histories of ancient worlds, they're not to be dismissed as pure fiction. It is that we confirm these truths from the Bible, as for example stated in 2 Peter 3, that worlds, that meaning the earth and the heavens, have been destroyed in the past, which means worlds must have existed on them and something happened to them. And it is by collecting circumstantial evidence such as that from mythology that we can piece together that something indeed did happen. Thanks for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.
Grace Grace and peace be multiplied. Grace and peace be